Let's start off with definitions. What does vibe coding mean to you individually? And what is the story of when you first really started seeing it take traction?
Sure. Well, until a few months ago, vibe coding kind of meant autocomplete to me, I would say. I would say since the latest round of models, the 2.5 Pro and the Sonnet and such, I see the real sparks of intelligence, and I guess whatever the next thing after autocomplete is super autocomplete, I guess is what I think about it now. So.
To me, vibe coding is really it means access and opportunity. So I wasn't a developer. I have a public policy degree, right? Coming into a technical industry. One thing that AI has done for me and many other people is it's broke down so many barriers to entry, right? There's so many obstacles with building, I think, when, I'm not a traditional developer. I've always sort of felt on the outside of things, but I've always had a desire to build and start companies, right? And so the ability now that AI and vibe coding has empowered me to build my own tools internally to stand up products and features all on is absolutely incredible.
And I think sort of the extreme definition of vibe coding is making an application and having paying users use it without personally writing a line of code yourself or necessarily even having any idea of how to do that. And it's kind of a joke, but it's also very interesting because sort of there's stages of development and stages of growth that you need to make a product. And like Austin said, it opens up possibilities to a lot of different people with a lot of different things. And it's not, it's not just necessarily coding in apps. It could be like, I hear music in my head and I've never had the opportunity to learn an instrument or software well enough to get that out of my head. Should I not have the right to let people hear it?
Bro, like Rick Rubin said, vibe coding is the punk rock of software development because you don't need to go through all this school of music. You just learn 4 chords and then start playing. Exactly that. You manifest that. Well, come back to the question for me. Vibe coding started 1-2% to slip in when we had Copilot. Like GitHub, it was just there. You click on that little button, and then it starts auto-completing. Oh, nice! I can have someone to write my bugs for me now, right? It started like that, and then it started to pick up cloud, and then OpenAI, and then everyone was, oh, you don't need to even code anymore. And I'm like, oh, wait, but I like to code. Actually, I get paid to code. So things evolved like that. And what I'm seeing is that really, if you want to get into vibe code to understand that, try it out. You don't need to know JavaScript, Python, anything. You just need to have an idea. You go for any website of Lovable, Replit, even ChatGPT, Cursor, Windsurf, whatever tool you prefer. Put your wildest idea there. A dating app for pets, whatever you want to build. And then you're going to see what vibe coding is. It's definitely not going to work, but 99% chance it's not going to work, but you're going to get a good sense of what vibe coding is.
What an interesting idea, dating app for pets. I think, as a VC, it's both incredible and a nightmare, right? Because now all of a sudden we're seeing 10 times the amount of volume of companies that we have to review and sort through. And it's a nightmare in the sense of cutting through all of the BS and trying to figure out who's serious. This is a tried and true team that's, building something really powerful versus, a wrapper that was thrown up in 30 seconds that may not have a long-term defensible advantage. I think as a VC, that becomes really, really tough. But it's also incredible because, if you do have an amazing idea, but in the past you may have lacked some of the resources or the technical frameworks in order to bring it to life. Now you can, and as a big supporter of startups and somebody who is super passionate about supporting the next generation of startups that are going to change the world, like that's incredible and it's amazing. So
I love that point. And for me, one thing that clicked was actually talking to Matthias here several months back, and he was like, Ali, what's the best programming language? And I'm like, oh, I know that question back from the ComSci days. It depends. And he was like, no, English. And I was like, what? He was like, English is now the programming language. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Like, it alludes to the point you were making of how in contemporary times, almost anyone can actually build that app. Like, it's unlocked a huge amount of potentials and taken away technical barriers for people to create things that solve real problems. But at the same time, that's created stress, like Austin was mentioning, on VCs. All of a sudden, you have a plethora more of applications coming in because it's never been easier to make that cat dating app. I'm curious to hear from the startup perspective of how fundraising has changed for you, and like how it was before vibe coding became somewhat mainstream versus now.
Sure. I think the speed and the competition and the quality bar generally is just raised, right? I mean, even a couple of years ago, like you could get away with something on, like I think we were talking about hackathons, you could get away with like a local host thing a couple of years ago. And now it's like, no, like put it on a website and use Vercel and have it like actually be functional. And that, even that small change is like, yeah, it's hugely different. It means that, I guess like to Austin's point, the bar to get like a hacky demo that a kind of non-technical person just like looking at it, they won't know the difference between something that is like elegantly constructed by like a super genius coder versus something that's kind of like slapped together. And I mean, of course, unless you like actually can do some diligence and dig into it, but. So I would say it's interesting that the bar, the like bottom 90% bar has been like raised a bunch, but I wouldn't say it has ultimately gotten to like, you know, rewriting like Haskell stuff or like doing like avionics for Boeing. Like it's not doing that, right? But in that like bottom 90%, there's almost like no excuse not to have like at least like a minimum viable thing now. And that's really, I mean, especially since the sonnets and the latest models. Pretty much the whole space has been compressed, and you can't really tell the difference now between people that know what they're doing and people that don't. So. Yeah.
A core principle of design thinking is the idea that if you bring diverse people with different backgrounds and skill sets and perspectives together, you can come up with the most creative and best solutions to problems. Now, given that the barrier is lower and more people have access to building technological solutions, what kind of new types of startups have you noticed emerging?
Can you kind of reframe a bit?
Have you noticed a change in the types of startups you're seeing or the creativity of the startups now that more people with different skill sets and perspectives have access to creating startups?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, the biggest change is, I think we're still seeing a ton of excellent founders, but frequently we're seeing people that are kind of emerging from being experts in a particular industry for 10 or 20 years, and they spent their whole career understanding the pain points of customers in a particular area, right, some traditionally outdated industry, and now they're kind of coming out of the woodwork and they have the tools that they need to be able to build incredible applications. And so I think instead of just developers and more technical people that are starting companies, one amazing trend for us is we're seeing a lot of industry experts, and as a VC, it's incredible. We want to invest in people that have been in, industries for decades and seen all the pain points and been there through that struggle, know all the people, know all the players, and are creating that company that solves a specific need. So we're seeing those people who I think deserve to be, incredible founders come forward. And as a VC, I'm having a lot more fun than I used to kind of navigating the idea maze, as Mark Andreessen would call it, for startups, which is essentially kind of exploring all of the paths and all of the paths that a startup can go down. If this happens, what will you respond in the future with your go-to-market strategy, and exploring all of these types of questions with founders. I think because it's now a lot more focused on just industry experts, those conversations are a lot better. So definitely seeing positive signs in that department.
Matthias, can you add anything onto that? Because I feel like you guys are rethinking with like Venture Miner how we look at funding vibe-coded startups. And could you talk a little bit about what you're working on there and the types of projects you're also seeing?
Yeah. We are seeing a trend starting. It kind of hit us in the face last year. We were in SF seeing all of that happening. And it's confirming more and more on how reducing the barrier of entry for bootstrapping is enabling a lot of different kind of apps that wouldn't be sustainable and viable before. Because let's say you have like $20,000 of cost just to develop that app. It means that if your idea cannot generate at least $200,000 of revenue for you to pay off and all the other costs, it's not viable. And most of people failed on that, and then they try to raise capital to solve that and all, because it was a difficult egg and the chicken situation, right? Now, actually, you have a cost of 2 weekends, 3 weekends to code something. You pay $2,000, $3,000 for a developer to review or an agency to review your code, and boom, you have a product. If you make $5,000 of sales in the first month or in the first quarter, you have a break even. This was not possible 2-3 years ago. It's not that easy today. A lot of people are saying that you can just go and vibe code your app out there and start having revenue. Look on LinkedIn, you're going to find a lot of people saying that. But when you get to the truth, actually, no, they're getting hacked, exploited because they don't know how the backend works and all. It is still a thing. Vibe coding nowadays is not that ready, unfortunately, to bootstrap your whole thing without knowing how to code. But it might be. Might be in 6 months, in 2 years, in 5 years, tomorrow. GPT-5, I don't know what's going to happen. And this is going to enable any kind of non-viable app that has $2,000 a month revenue, but it's enough for a student that is looking for a job that can't get employed to be a successful startup founder. And then he can pivot, he can go for higher markets and all. And then when they go for a VC, they can demonstrate traction, they can demonstrate that they understand the communication with the client, that they can adapt, that they can process payroll, and all that you would have as a possible risk when a startup is starting. You have all of that solved because the founder has been bootstrapped for 6 months, 1 year. Maybe it's going to be an easier investment case for you to, okay, I'm going to trust you with this amount of money that you're asking, right? Might be a thing now. I didn't have any successful student to fundraising in that model yet, but it might as well happen this year. Might be us writing history here, right?
Awesome. At hackathons, I've noticed a trend where I'm sitting with a hacker and they're running into challenges and they say, "Hey, I need help." And then I run on over and I'm like, "Okay, let's look what's going on." "Oh, what are you trying to do?" "Oh, you're trying to commit your code on GitHub, but you're failing." And the hacker's like, "What's GitHub?" And I'm staring at them and I'm like, "What do you mean what? You've never heard of it?" They're like, "No, I just started vibe coding like a couple weeks ago." And I'm starting to see a lot more people running into very curious most common challenges you've seen since the advent of vibe coding with the builders that you interact with, or even within your own team. What are some stories or examples you could share?
I'll start. Well, I just saw that happen Monday. So people are winning hackathon bounties and all without understanding their underlying tech. We could argue that this is bad, or maybe this is good, but this is something that we as like DevRels and me as a teacher, you are protocols, and you need to understand, we need to understand what is going to be the best channel of communication with these hackers in the future. If we're going to embrace that, or push against, because maybe the documentations are irrelevant if people are not going to read. If they can deploy a smart contract and generate revenue and have users solve the pain of the users without reading a documentation, I find this something good. Can be dangerous. Don't throw stones yet. Wait, with the tomato. It can be dangerous. Yes, I'm addressing these pains. I'm doing tutorials and content for that. But if any random Joe can go there, even without taking a boot camp, without taking education, and they can deploy a smart contract, even without knowing what is GitHub, and the AI can handle all of that efficiently, we are in a golden age. We are going to have so many new startups per week that we didn't have in a year 10 years ago. I don't think we should fight against that. This is something exciting for me.
Matthias, just to build on that, are there any particular startups that come to mind that just blew you away, that vibe coding kind of enabled them to be where they were at?
Well, I can remember last week the very famous example of that Base 44 company that they had just 10 employees. They were doing website generation for vibe coders and all, and they just got acquired by $80 million by Wix, you know. This is a strong signal indication that, well, something is happening here.
Quick note on GitHub, because you brought up GitHub. A hot take, but I think maybe more so than Linux, Linus Torvalds' invention of Git is probably like the most important thing that could like happen now, because if you don't have version control and you're trying to vibe code, you are like totally and completely screwed. So it's like almost mandatory now. And when you use Git, you're feeding the data set. And when you're using Git and GitHub and doing it open source, then you're feeding the data set faster. So Git and GitHub, well, I mean, we've kind of built an entire business on top of GitHub, right? But they're extremely important. And yes, I think the days of sort of coding on your own computer and then not checking it back in or sharing it with the world are like fundamentally incompatible with vibe coding, because you basically have to have version control, because it will break and it will mess up, and most people don't know what they're doing, and if they can't go back to their last version, then they're like never going to get anywhere. So
I would love to double click and like if you could share with us like what DevDApp does, and then also, how does AI play into it? Like whether people are vibe coding solutions or making an AI agent to, like, after you explain it, I'll continue the question.
Sure. So we've been leveraging these new AI tools, specifically the MCP stuff, this Model Context Protocol stuff, to put an AI agent inside of GitHub. We think it's extremely important with this sort of glut of new code. Like some people call it AI slop, but it could be great. This glut of new stuff that's coming in. There needs to be somebody that moderates what's going on, and then there needs to be somebody that incentivizes what's going on. So we've installed a AI agent inside of GitHub, and it reviews all the activity that goes on in the repo, and then it labels all of that activity, and then we match those labels up with on-chain rewards. So we basically have like an incentive reward system for GitHub. And we think it's very timely and very needed, because you can't just, like, to your point, you can't have like 1,000 times more stuff happening, because it exceeds a human's ability to like be able to like understand it and comprehend it. The only way that you can really balance those things out is to also have an agent inside of GitHub moderating those things. So.
One of the most exciting attributes of Web3 is its composable nature and everything being fundamentally open source that's deployed on chain, right? Assuming you verify. And it's really exciting, because what that means is when you solve a problem once, you solve it for everyone at all times. It also kind of facilitates compound interest of innovation. Now, from an ecosystem perspective, I love what you guys are doing in that I definitely see hundreds of open source projects that would love to invite people to contribute to them. Now, the way that you guys are incentivizing and rewarding people for contributing to these open source projects, are you seeing an uptake in the amount of vibe-coded contributions? Or what's preventing me from creating an AI agent that's just looking for different bounties to contribute to and submitting them passively?
There's nothing actually, right? Because it's a giant arms race. So, right, that is kind of the game theory behind incentives. Is you incentivize somebody to do a thing, and they're going to find an efficient way to farm it. But I think on the whole, having kind of micro rewards that expose humans or even agents to your technology is a good thing, and it's an extremely efficient. From like a cost perspective, efficient way to get new users using your thing, and not just using it, but like proving that they actually know how to use it, right? So, like an example, you read the SDK or whatever, and you make like a little demo application. You submit the demo application, and the agent isn't doing total rocket science right now, but it is making sure that like the environment variables are set up properly and that it's deployed properly. And I think that's worth some monetary. Like you or your agent spent a couple of minutes to at least read the documentation and do something properly. I think it's valuable, and I think that's a thing that's worth rewarding and helps grow ecosystems.
I know you're a technical founder. I'm curious if your like development team has run into any interesting challenges while utilizing AI-assisted programming to build the product itself. Like, are there any stories or examples that come to mind that you're down to share?
Yeah, I mean a really geeky one, but like I had our kind of like Go moment, like AlphaGo moment. I don't know if you remember, like a long time ago, Google had AlphaGo, and then it did this move. It invented this move that like never existed before. And yeah, anyway, it did a similar thing with like a weird Nginx routing issue that we had, and it solved it in this like totally convoluted way. That like very bloated, like it's not like an efficient way, but it did solve it, and it was like, oh, like okay, so great, like that. So and that just happened in the last maybe like month or so. So yeah, that's an example. But I'm sure now that doesn't happen all the time. It's dumb much more than it's intelligent. But the fact that it did do that one time, like definitely pushed my needle towards like, well, that's. Probably going to be 6 months or a year from now. It'll be smart like 80% of the time. So, yeah.
Anyone want to add in any interesting stories of how vibe coding had some challenging consequences or? Oh.
Yeah, so I mean, my take on this is that it's new and exciting, and these are wonderful tools, but it's also nothing new. Like, we've been going through iterations of this kind of thing forever, particularly within the modern world and, the last 20 or 30 years, like, things change a little bit, how things work a little bit, but, go and compare, go to a used bookstore and take a look at the covers on science fiction books from 1950 that were published by big publishers with lots of money and people making decisions and approving these things and deciding this is good enough to send out. And then look at what you see now. And it's because now there's much better tools for artists to do much better things with them. But we still need artists. They still make beautiful things, and it's still worth doing. And we have a similar thing with coding and programming where, these tools are great. I use it every day. If you're a programmer and you are not using AI tools, not necessarily to vibe code, I think of it more as having a really fast junior engineer pair programming with you who has a great memory, types lightning quick, and makes really bad decisions all the time. And you got to say, hey, buddy, remember, we're using Tailwind. Let's not use embedded inline styles for this component, please. And like, oh, right. Totally. You're totally right. Gotcha. And then there's scary things, too, that are the kinds of things that a junior might do, which is like every AI model that I've ever worked with, Solidity, highlights the flaws and concerns with Solidity, and it loves to write reentrant code. And I'm like, hey, I'm pretty sure they can use that function to drain all of the balance of this contract. And it's like, oh, right, you're so smart for figuring that out. Let me fix that for you. But so there's consequences and downsides. But what all of these iterations of these things do is there's sort of two sides to the coin that I think both are really important. One is that it allows new minds and new thoughts and new people to have access to these things. And like another one that we can see a lot of parallels to is the rise of indie video games. And if you look at the late 2000s, early 2010s, and the quality of game engines like first XNA and then Unity and things like that, you can have people make worldwide games played by millions of people with its small team, and that just wouldn't have been possible before. And so like it was funny to me when like Nintendo came out with Breath of the Wild and everyone was like, oh, it's so amazing, it's this big giant world, it's huge, you can go anywhere, you can see anywhere, you can like combine all of these mechanics together to do these crazy things. And I'm like, yeah, but that stuff's like 10 years old. It was just indie games doing it in a kind of a funny, janky way. And now you've taken, that inspiration to polish it. And that's the other side of it. It's like, we're always going to have innovation. We're always going to have new companies taking over the world. But imagine Google having 20,000 engineers using a bespoke tuned AI that communicates internally with what people are doing, the practices that they're developing. Like, that's a lot of horsepower, and they're going to do a lot of stuff with that. And so, AI is just the most recent in these generations of tools that, on the one hand, make it so that new people can contribute their ideas and do things. But it's also like, it's going to be adopted. And I think a lot of the products that we use are balanced more for what the market will bear in terms of the amount of labor to put into the product, determining the outputs when combined with the tools. So like go back and go to Wayback Machine and use a website from like 2008. It's much worse than you remember it being. It looks much worse. It feels much worse. It is much worse because we have all of these tools and the people to use them.
I love the analogy of the junior developer. And guys, if you guys want to talk, just wanted to highlight that we have a beautiful room in the stairwell. Let's just be respectful for the speakers a bit. I love the analogy of the junior developer, and I'm curious how. I keep on hearing developers that are graduating in computer science saying like, oh my God, there are no junior positions. There's no junior DevRel. There's no junior software developer. There's no junior front end anymore. How do I actually start getting experience? I'm really curious to hear your guys' views, whether it's a new junior analyst in a fund, or it's a new junior DevRel, or a junior dev that you're inviting to join your startup. Like, how have you changed the ways that you evaluate candidates, and do you expect them to be able to leverage AI tools? How do you test that?
So I think we're kind of have two overlapping things with that phenomena. One is that the economy happened in the last couple of years, and so that's harmed junior developers and junior developer roles. It was apocalyptic for the online coding bootcamp industry. And so that's something in tech that sort of ebbs and flows anyway. And then combining it with AI, there's many companies that I think foolishly are thinking, oh, we can cut costs by replacing it with AI labor. But I think that's going to feed into what I was just talking about, where you actually can't do that because everyone has AI labor. And so to stay competitive, it comes back to the amount of labor that the product will bear to get it to market. And the quality is going to go up, which is great for all of us. And so for a junior developer, it's learning the new way of doing things and learning how to be effective and create and build value with the way that the tools are. And I'm old enough to remember, the idea, my first programming class was in a classroom with no computers, and they wanted us to learn C by writing it on pen and paper. And if you typed it, if you used an editor, you weren't understanding the fundamentals of programming, and you were never going to have a career. You were never going to be a good programmer. You couldn't do it. So it's like, this is all just time as a flat circle, and history is repeating itself. And so, the previous version of this is we've shifted as an industry. We're finally it used to be we're going to interview on programming, but we're not going to let you use Google while you're programming, even though we know you're going to use it every day in your job. And finally, everyone realized that that's kind of stupid. And now, a few years ago, if you interviewed a candidate and are asking them to do something and they didn't look up something on Google, they didn't use the docs, they didn't search something, you'd be like, what's wrong with this? I told you could use all the tools you want, right? Why are you struggling? This just Google how mapping works in JavaScript. It's fine. And I think now AI is the thing for that, and has influenced how we evaluate and hire juniors. It's like we want to see someone who can come in and teach us how this works, and then we can teach them, the older way of doing things, because that hasn't lost value. with the AIs, and I don't think this is ever going to change, is that sometimes you have to go in and change its opinion manually and say, like, look, no, this is how we're doing it. This is the reason for doing it. You know, this is the optimal solution. But then sometimes you're also wrong, and the AI or the junior who's used to it is like, hey, did you know you could do this? And you're like, no. Well then.
Yeah, I have a couple of things to add. You know, from the VC operator perspective, I think it's about two things. One is staying up to date, and I think that's kind of undervalued. Things are just moving so fast. There are new AI tools that are coming out every single day. And so your ability to stay up to date with the latest in, you know, developments and new tools and, you know, there are just incredible startups that are coming out at Series A that are already providing such serious value for users. I see it all the time. And like, even knowing that those companies exist, I think there's a lot of alpha in. And so, you know, I interviewed for analysts for our fund, and I'm thinking about, one, your ability to stay up to date. So, you know, what are you reading? What do you have access to? Like, what startups are you looking at? There are amazing newsletters and sources. I love Superhuman AI. That's a great one. But it's that first component of staying up to date with the latest, and then also being able to leverage so many of these SaaS platforms. I think it's a wonderful skill to, you know, make an account in a new platform and just dive into understanding everything in there. I think there's a lot of value in cobbling together tools nowadays. So like, there's no shame in, you know, connecting your CRM to, you know, some AI agent platform via Zapier or Make, right, or N8N increasingly. And your ability to kind of dive into these tools, understand their value props for your organization, and then customize it and tailor it to your needs. There's a lot of value there. So knowing that the platforms exist and then being able to leverage them effectively.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could always be an optimist or a pessimist about these things, and you know, might as well be an optimist. So, from the like optimist standpoint, the whole like the barrier to entry thing being crazy low, I guess that, you know, effectively raises the bar for everyone. So, and not to go to GitHub again, but I would say the value of a developer that has an open source repository that has data in it that can be studied, you know, versus a developer that doesn't. I would say that's a huge advantage. And why not just fill up your GitHub repo with like a whole bunch of commits with a whole bunch of vibe coded stuff that makes you look good and have a good resume? I think that would get you ahead. And yeah, just to plug the MCP servers one more time, I think it seems like Anthropic has one, and that is kind of like the new API standard thing. And I know it's only like 3 or 4 months old, but it is extremely powerful if there's a standard way that you can interface with like any API in the world. And there are bajillions of legacy, you know, Web 2 businesses, and that seems like a great way to get a job if you know how you can apply MCP stuff to the myriad of legacy APIs that are out there, because I don't think SaaS is going away anytime soon. It's just that a human might not be reading the documentation and doing the integration. You know, an agent will, but if you can help in building that out, then at least you have a job for a few more years. So.
That's question. The same question. Same question. Yeah, maybe we can try and gauge from the audience. Raise your hand if you tried vibe coded something. More than half. That's actually almost everyone. We have a good crowd here. Now raise your hand if the thing you vibe coded worked as you expected. Well, more than 10. I'm surprised that you are good vibe coders. Well, raise your hand if you generated revenue with the thing you vibe coded. 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's good. This is happening then. It's data. Maybe 6 months ago, no one will raise their hand. Let's do that again 6 months from now.
I absolutely love that. What are ways that startups could stand out in the AI age for fundraising and actually because nowadays like VCs are leveraging that AI like you do with your work, Austin, to try to find the best signals. How do I stand out as an early stage founder so that I'm able to raise? Or should I even be focusing on raising? Or should I just focus on, well, it's so easy to start the product, maybe I should get into MRR and just start generating revenue? Like, what perspective do you have on that?
Yeah. So I think, there's a lot of wonderful things, about venture capitalists vibe coding and using AI for startups. I think, we're going to be able to look at so many more startups. We're going to know when you're fundraising, before you realize you're ready, right? And I think in this age where there's just so much more access to information, as a startup, what you need to do is just own your digital narrative. So, when you think about like the data points that we're pulling in as a VC to study you and your firm, it's going to go beyond stage and sector and description, right? Like we're going to get increasingly technical with our investment thesis. And, if you say, okay, we can pull in a list of 10,000 startups that, at a baseline are, potentially investable by us. We're going to break that down into 10 to 20 different criteria that we look at, and we'll be able to screen to get that from a list of 10,000 down to maybe 500 that our deal sourcing team will then take over and review manually. Right. So if you want to be a part of that doesn't get screened out at the top of the funnel, you need to make sure that your digital narrative is tight, right? So if you have a deck online, you need to make sure that those materials are tight. You need to make sure that your website, your social media, all of these things are regularly updated and presenting you in the best and most accurate light. And I think if you do that, then you have a really solid chance of kind of being brought into venture capital firms' funnels.
My very did you want to add something, Brian?
Well, I wanted to ask a question that just sort of popped into my head as you were describing about it, that I'm curious from your perspective if things might move in this direction where, with like decks, for example, there's things like the classic, 30-20-10 rule, large font, small number of slides, quick, snappy presentation. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, as you gain tools that let you better evaluate data, if we'll see a shift into, startups needing and wanting to provide more amounts of actual meaningful data backing to what they're doing that's less snappy and tight and soundbitey and more a comprehensive story that meaningfully backs up the premise that they're proposing to you, because you'll have the AI tools to help you sift through all of that and evaluate it.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting thought. I think, we're not there yet, obviously. Deck and a one-pager and a little blurb is probably good enough. But, I definitely think, we're going to be searching earlier and earlier for alpha. And so, if we can have access to even like data rooms and, just very granular information. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about that yesterday, actually, like getting in there and, looking at your GitHub, not sure exactly what the data points are that we're specifically searching for there. But yes, 100%. I mean, I think we'll be probably asking and, just automatically getting supplied with much more information from founders earlier and earlier, whether you're providing it to us or whether we're going out and finding it ourselves, right? We'll know that you just closed 3 sales this month, right? So I just think in this age of information, we're going to have the bandwidth to be able to review a lot more startups, but, not just a lot more startups. We're going to be able to review them better, more accurately with more data points at our fingertips. So, I could see that happening.
It sounds like the new data rooms might be the posts you make on Twitter, the Notion pages you cobble together, and your GitHub history, which is fascinating. My very last question is vibe coding. Is it a fad or does it have a future? What do you guys individually think the next 4 or 5 years it's going to look like?
Nah, it's totally a fad. Well, vibe coding as a concept is one thing. Vibe coding as we have right now is still a marketing play. Our model is basically based on sponsorship, and we are sponsored by some companies and all that are trying to pose themselves as the gateway, the golden path for you to put your idea, and it magically becomes a business in the other side. Yes, now pay me $50. But it's not like that yet. You still need to have your GitHub understand, man. You still need to have your data in place. You still need to ask the AI not to introduce reentrancy in the smart contract. Maybe it was trained by North Korea just to to have more hacking loopholes. But like right now, it's still a concept. We are going there. Started with autocomplete 2 years ago, 3 years ago. MCP was released in November, but people only got to know it like 3-4 months ago. So things are still going there. We are in the 50s, 60s, thinking when we are going to go to moon. And then in 69, okay, now we have foot on the moon, as they claim, or maybe it was pictures. No, well, not getting into conspiracy theories here. That is always these movements toward ideal of a technology. And we find our ways there. Maybe we are going to help build that future where you don't need to take 6 months of classes before you can just prompt your idea into life. If we get there, I guess the humanity is going to be in a much better way. The developers, they can adapt. I survive from development, and I'm sorry, we are going to lose our jobs. We just need to accept that. Maybe we write less code and do more architecture, something that the AI is, they have more problem setting up the correct architecture, or we using Tailwind instead of that. So maybe this is going to be a shift. And I guess a lot of the resistance or the resistance against the term of vibe coding is because there is a gap between the expectations and what we find in reality. This gap is closing. People make money on this gap, is marketing as always, right? But I totally believe that it is a thing. If we keep pushing a few months, maybe a few years, we're going to see that happening, whether you like it or not, you know?
I just want to add one little question on top of it. What can vibe coders here today do to get involved with what you're working on? What opportunities can you offer them?
Yeah, I have YouTube videos with 10 views. Just kidding. Going there. We just released it with some partners last week, explaining everything, how to plug in your MCP servers. With Patrick Skinner, we have that video there. How to plug in Cello, how to plug in Flow, maybe the next one. How to the art of prompt engineering, how to set up your cursor rules, how to get free credits between stuff, this kind of stuff. We had a session that in 20 minutes, we vibe coded a whole game from zero to like an asteroid blaster. So we have this kind of content. We have membership, we have mentorship, advisory. We do help startups to get started. We do help them to onboard in the community. VentureMiner, just check that ventureminer.com. You're going to see all the information there. And maybe if all goes well, we can even help these startups to bootstrap and raise capital in the near future, as we have planning for now. Just go there, ventureminer.com/academy. You're going to find all of this information. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you, Matthews.
Oh, sorry, remind me of the...
So where's the future heading? Is it a fad, or does it actually have legs? And what's something that vibe coders could engage with what you're working on today?
For sure. Definitely not a fad, and this is as a recent convert. I think the 1 grain of rice on the chessboard, 2 grains of rice, 64th grain of rice. The thing is that, like humans have a hard time with exponentials, but if you just plot like the IQ of these models on a graph, like that's why it's kind of like scary to think like too far into the future, So I won't but I would say maybe the fantasy of vibe coding and then the reality are quite disparate right now, but that gap will close. That gap will definitely close. And then to echo the architecture, right? That's probably the last, I guess you just have to keep moving up the value chain all the way until I guess it does its own AI research, I guess is like like ultimate top of the value chain, but yeah, junior programmers, right? And then you know, it'll keep moving up the value chain. So you, I guess, just have to keep racing up the value chain faster than it it does. Yeah, and then yeah, if anybody wants to play with our tools, devdapp.com, and then you just make an issue in one of the repositories that we link to. Our agent sees what you do. We use GitHub Actions. We analyze your issue, and then we give you a label, and that label can be testnet tokens or you know money of various forms, and then it just ends up right in your like GitHub controlled Web3 wallet. So yeah, very easy. And the first one is just like a copy paste task, just so you can see how it works. So yeah, if you want to try it, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'm definitely a techno optimist. I think it has a future. You know, in the beginning, I was super gung ho, like a lot of people, on like need to have serious long-term moat and competitive advantage, right? But I've seen so many point solutions deliver value to users in a matter of months that I've been converted. I think there are a ton of wrappers that still are incredible solutions, can be viable startups. I think there's so much value in personalization. So, you know, for example, OpenAI may introduce internal data connectors into their suite of tools, but I don't think that just wipes out an entire industry of startups and vibe-coded apps that have built similar like agent platforms for leveraging internal data. We use something completely different that we built internally, and it's a much better fit for our team. So I'm a really big fan. I think the future is more personalized and customized, and like who better to build that than you, right? So definitely think that vibe coding has a future. As far as where its place in what I'm doing, I'm definitely a big proponent of AI for venture capital. I think it's still so nascent, right? Like the average VC is incredibly manual and still doing things in Sheets and Drive, right? So very few VCs, you know, maybe 10 to 20 are really harnessing the powers of AI practically. And so if you're interested in breaking into venture capital generally, I think there's kind of a massive inefficiency right now where we will need to adopt it. It will be table stakes. It's not going to be just a competitive advantage. It is absolute table stakes for VCs and investors. But most people, you know, are still in the very early stages of implementation there. So if you can, you know, vibe code, build solutions, products specifically for investors, I think that's definitely a hell of a way to get a job. That's essentially what I did, how I broke into venture capital. So if you are interested in that, happy to discuss it further. Thanks.
So I think the answer is that it's neither. It's a tool. And it's a very powerful tool. It's a very useful tool. And it's a tool that's going to change how we do things.
We're at time. Let's give an amazing round of applause for our awesome speakers. Woo! You guys really vibe today. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure you could come up to the speakers if they don't have to bounce right away. For the rest of the agenda of today, grab some brunch, grab some coffee. The next hour and 20-ish is full of networking. Try to talk to some investors that are here, share your projects, learn from other builders. It's going to be open networking from now. Thank you, guys.